Oh, I loved your last session. That was perfect segue for this one.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I do want to say I loved when you said you were a boundary coach because boundaries are important,
Hmm.
particularly for ourselves. I'm a big proponent of self boundaries because once
Hmm.
you get those boundaries locked in, it's easy to
Hmm.
apply them towards other
Hmm.
people and situations. But yeah,
Yeah.
so we're just meeting for the audience so that they know I keep it real. That's how I roll. So your topic is the role of trauma and addiction recoveries. You kind of alluded to the fact that
Hmm.
little trauma is the absence of good things happening to you,
Hmm.
which I
Hmm.
love. Can you share a little bit more about how
Hmm.
that experience led you to
Hmm.
being a coach around boundaries, which
Yeah.
absolutely helps take care
Yeah.
of that trauma?
Yeah, I feel it's appropriate here to quote a couple of guys I know who were each in AA and ACA for over 30 years. And they both said separately in different language. In the AA 12 steps, it doesn't say quit drinking, but you can't quit. You can't recover without quitting drinking. In the ACA steps, it doesn't say set boundaries, but you cannot recover without setting boundaries. And the reason it's so imperative for adult children is that trauma, one of the many detrimental results of trauma is that we don't have boundaries. We don't know who we
Absolutely.
are. We don't know where we end and where other people begin. We don't know what's our responsibility and not our responsibility. We don't know what we want, like, need, and prefer. So we become yes people. We become people pleasers, overgivers, fixers, rescuers, savers, enablers, codependents. And so it had my work has everything to do with that. The vast majority of people that I coach have some kind of childhood trauma, dysfunction, etc. I get most of my clients from my podcast, which is a recovery podcast. So I'm going to say like above 80% of my clients are in recovery, many of whom have been in CODA, Al-Anon, ACA for years and still haven't gotten a handle
Yeah.
on boundaries. And I liked what you said. You called them self boundaries. I call them boundaries of self containment.
Yeah.
There are many types of boundaries, but for me, those boundaries had the most going on, right?
Yep.
So there's boundaries of self-containment that just affect me, but then there are boundaries of self-containment that affect other people. And so one of the most profound ones for me was to stop gossiping. This was one of my worst defects of character, which I didn't know I had. So here's the difference between my OA recovery program and my ACA program. In OA, you're selfish, self-seeking, you're the problem and you need to fix it. And this is true. And you're not allowed to look at other people. In ACA, we're like, you are a product of your environment. You did not just turn up just like this for no
Yes.
reason. So the way that I look at it, specifically step 4, in OA, it's what did I do? In ACA, it's what happened to me. So I can still get at what I did. So gossip is the perfect example. What happened to me, Carrie, is that I grew up in a family that engaged in indirect communication. You didn't go to the person you had a problem with and say, hey, let's address this problem. You talked to everybody around them and you didn't talk about the problem. You talked about the person.
Yes.
So this is a communication pattern laid down in my family before I was born. I had no hope of growing up in that family and going out into the world and knowing how to directly communicate or that it was a thing. In fact, I thought people were rude, right? So what did I do? I gossiped.
Of course.
So, and I didn't know, this is crazy, but I worked for 19 years at Yale University as a program coordinator for urban education. I had the same boss the whole time. And I didn't know that talking negatively about her behind her back for 19 years was gossip. It's the fucking definition of gossip, talking negatively behind someone's back for years on end. But I didn't know that. I'm not dumb. I have a master's degree in sociology. I'm a well-educated person. But I didn't know that was gossip because that's what you do. You don't fix problems, you complain about them.
Right,
So,
because that's what you were brought up believing.
right,
And that
exactly.
goes to exactly earlier that if that's your belief, how do you know otherwise? So
Right,
I love
exactly.
that you brought that up because you don't
Right,
know. And I think when we
right.
assume somebody should know something, that's when
Mhm.
we're unable to really show up and support
Right,
them
right.
in the
Yeah,
meaningful
and I
way.
love that you said that because that's one of the very specific things I teach in my empowering communication module with my clients is that we've got to stop, assuming that people know things. Stop trying to read people's minds. You're
Yeah.
wrong when you're doing it, and you've never been right about anything that you've decided what their motives are. So back to why I started talking about gossip. So that's an example of a boundary of self-containment that affects other people.
Yeah.
So when we implement these boundaries of self-containment, we are stopping putting ourselves in harm's way. And sometimes harm's way is what I do to myself when I rev up my nervous system. We're stopping creating chaos around us. So I gossiped about my boss and I created a culture of expectation where we don't address problems, we talk about them. We blame the boss as being the problem. And so when I stopped gossiping, I was shocked at the ripple effect on my team because what I started doing was I stopped expecting her to be different than she was for the last 19 years. And I started stepping up and taking responsibility for things that were perfectly within my purview. But because I kept waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting for her to change and blaming her, and she's the problem. That's called victim mentality, by the way. That is my number one paradigm shift from recovery, was coming out of victim mentality. And I think, this is another reason why I became a boundaries coach, because so many of the mentalities that come from trauma, black and white thinking, unrealistic expectations of ourselves, other people, and the world, victim mentality, um, the feeling the need to control other people, all get dealt with when you build healthy boundaries. I actually just came across, I picked up my recovery journal, which I haven't picked up in years, to take notes today. And I wrote this years ago. It says, I want predictability. In the past, I tried to use control. Now I use boundaries. The way I have predictability is I decide how I want to live my life. And then I go about living my life in such and raping and pillaging since the history of humans. That shit is stored in our tissues. The issues are in our tissues.
Yep.
So all of us, but then there are some populations that have even worse, that have been oppressed and denigrated for eons. And so we're carrying this stuff around. But the idea is that it's not just a drinking problem that you have. It's not just a drug problem. It's not just a electronic device problem or a shopping problem or a workaholism problem or a gambling problem or an eating problem. Those are methods that we're trying to use to numb the pain.
Yep.
And so if we don't address the actual underlying cause of the trauma, we can actually re-traumatize people
Yep.
and do the opposite of what we're trying to do and send them into a relapse. And, I'd like to pick up on something that you said a moment ago, which was about being reactive, and that you said we create trauma for other people. Sometimes it's not quite trauma, sometimes it's just chaos.
Yeah.
But one of the things that we say in the ACA program, we have this list of the 14 traits of an adult child, which is affectionately called the laundry list. One of which is we are addicted to excitement. Now, when I first heard that, I thought it meant that I'm a daredevil and I like roller coasters. I don't like either of those things. What it means is that we're addicted to chaos. In other
Yeah.
words, we are used to our systems being like this in fight or flight mode our entire lives. And to us, that equals life. So we do things consciously and subconsciously to continually activate our nervous system. And there's a thing that we do that I've heard called layering. So I can do something like I drive my car until it's on fumes and worry about whether I'm going to run out. And then I don't pay my taxes and I don't show up on time for things. So I'm doing all of these at the same time. So I have this system that's going like this all the time. And then like, you're not making sane, emotionally sober decisions.
You're right.
You're not acting on life, you're reacting to it. And so if we don't address the trauma, we're never going to come out of that stuff. And so our attempts to numb our system Like we want to be high or we want to be drunk. And because we don't want to feel that way, I can't tell you how many people I've heard say the first time I drank a drink, I felt this is the feeling I've been looking for my entire life.
Yep.
That's or the first time I had that, I ate overate the sugar, whatever the thing is. That's the feeling I've been looking for my entire life. What we really want is peace. But if you've lived a life of chaos, like I remember when I did the 12 steps the first time in ACA, I did it in a small group. One of the women had been sober in AA for 12 years. And as she started to get a measure of peace from being in ACA, she was like, what is this peace shit?
Yes.
It was intolerable to her at first because it was
Intolerable.
so foreign. This is why we date healthy people when we get in recovery and we're like, they're boring. It's because we're used to drama. But if you give yourself the time, you can get used to peace and then expect peace because this is the nervous system regulation that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
This is how we become happy, joyous, and free. This is how we live a life of peace and serenity. So I can't tell you how many people I have seen come into ACA with years, sometimes decades, in other programs where they've been clean and sober and their lives are still a mess.
I
And they
agree.
get an ACA and they're like, oh my God, this is it right here. This is the root cause. This is why I ate, why I drank, why I gambled, why I sexted, why I deaded, all those things. And so they know like you have to get sober. Like the ACA literature says, you've got to deal with your primary addiction first. You can't do the ACA recovery when you're drunk or
Yeah.
when you're high. You can't. You need to do it, but you need to do both if you really want to be happy, joyous, and free.
Well, it's interesting. I have a bit of a different approach, but what I really do love that you're saying, right, is that yeah, very similar to you. I work with people who the mere idea of breath work or sitting and doing yoga is arduous, and I just hate it. I don't like it. I hate it. And I don't fight with them on it because I know you hate it because that's
Mhm.
really, really real. Because for you to stop and pause is so uncomfortable. And I think it goes back to what Anita was saying, where then we allow ourselves to feel the feelings rather than
Yeah.
to just keep creating
Mhm.
chaos or,
Mhm.
to your
Mhm.
point, catastrophizing
Mhm.
the future. Because now we're like, this one thing's happening to me, but I'm going to focus on every little thing in my world and let everything feel like it's a bomb about to come off. And that's where
Mhm.
we just can't self regulate and then we numb out
Mhm.
because it just
Mhm.
feels so, so hard. So,
Right.
I'm going by these questions. So, can you
Mhm.
talk about some of the ways to address some
Mhm.
of these traumas to start to
Yeah.
heal?
Yeah. So I'll talk first about things that I personally have done, and then I'll name a couple things that I know that my fellows in recovery do that I haven't used. So a huge part of ACA recovery is they call becoming your own loving parent. It's inner family work. Some people know about IFS, inner family systems theory. So the work we do in ACA is kind of like a subset of
So,
that.
what's ACA for anybody out
So
there?
adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional
Okay, yeah,
families.
okay.
I never heard the and dysfunctional families part, so I didn't know I qualified.
Yeah.
So I do a lot of inner child work. So it starts with cultivating an inner loving parent. So this could be you, it could be a character from history, it could be a fictional character, it could be someone that you make up that treats you lovingly. And that our theory in ACA is that inner critical voice is an inner critical parent that has been internalized from perhaps your caregivers. And so, as the inner loving parent presence gets more and more, the inner critical parent backs up, and then the inner child, the innocent child with the hurt feelings, feels safe to express.
Yeah.
And so, I've learned to do. I started with non-dominant handwriting to get in contact with my inner child. Now, the first 8 years of my ACA recovery, I dabbled in this inner family work. And the last year and a half, it has exploded. And I cannot tell you the level of healing that it has caused me. There's a lot of somatic work that is done for people with trauma. So I have done trauma release exercises. I have done EFT, emotional freedom technique. That's people know
Tapping,
about the
yep.
tapping. I did yoga for 12-step recovery for 2.5 years. I do yoga every day. I meditate. Like meditation is one of those things I wanted to do my whole life. I just couldn't do it. And now I do it every day, usually for at least 30 minutes twice a day because I need to. I
Yeah.
need to.
And so can I
I,
just highlight real quick for everybody out watching, everything that you're saying, I am so aligned in. I mean, I concur. But when I started meditating, it was brutal. I couldn't sit for 30 seconds. And so
yeah,
I think it's important that our audience understands all of these things are going to take time. It's not going to
right,
all feel comfortable. It's going to take moving through
right.
discomfort so
Yeah,
that way you can experience the
yeah.
peace that Barb is talking about because it is tangible and it's achievable, but it takes work and it takes,
Right. And for that very reason, that's why I started with guided visualizations
yeah,
because they engaged multiple senses of
yeah,
mine. And so I was anchoring into the meditation with multiple senses, and it was easier for me because my attention was directed from multiple senses in one place. And that's why I said I tried to do it my whole life. I couldn't because I couldn't sit still.
yeah,
And I felt like I wasn't doing anything and I wasn't being productive because, that's a huge part of my like I need to feel like to matter, I have to be contributing something, and that hasn't gone away entirely, but I don't need to contribute 24 hours a day,
yeah,
the way that I used to feel that way. So some of the methods, like one of the most common methods that my peers use is EMDR, that's eye movement desensitization and repatterning. And it's now not just about the eyes, it's actually bilateral stimulation of the brain. And it started with the eye movements. There are a variety of other trauma. There's a couple of new rapid, I can't even remember what the name of they are, but there's a couple of rapid trauma recovery modalities that people use. IFS, the internal family systems theory. People do that. There's a lot of somatic training. I haven't gone to like a somatic therapist. But the point of somatic therapy is that trauma lives in your body, in your
yep,
cells, in your tissues, in your bones, in your blood, in your DNA. And so in order to really heal that, we have to do some body work. And that, you've talked about feelings, like feelings is some of the most important work that we do in ACA recovery, is learning how to identify, because most people can't identify them. They have like two feelings, maybe three, because they've shoved them and they're in a giant ball. So
yep,
identifying feelings and then understanding them and then actually feeling them and processing them and releasing them. And for me, some of the ways that I have done the most healing of feelings is with the reparenting. So, for example, I had some traumatizing incidents from childhood, and I reimagined myself going with my inner loving parent, being with me through that same episode and shepherding me through the experience and explaining to me what was going on and saying, you're not in trouble for this, like, so briefly, my dad did a ruse to get me to go downstairs on my birthday to tell him to get something for him, but it was really a trick to get me to see that he made a bike for me, put a bike together for me. But I'm 7. I don't know what a ruse is. My dad said do it, so I do it. So I was like confused, and I got the book and I went upstairs, and he lost his shit because he was like, aren't you going to say anything about the bicycle? I stayed up all night long. So I was like, ah, and it was
yeah,
super traumatizing to me, right?
yep,
So I got to have my inner loving parent go, you don't need to go get the thing. This bike is yours. It's for you. So I got to feel the joy
yeah,
of getting a bike and running upstairs and being like, thank you, Dad. I'm literally getting chills in my body. And then my father, in my imagination, got to have the experience of giving the joy of a bike to his daughter.
yeah,
And that heals me. It heals me
yep,
retroactively, And so like there's no like that happened in my body. I
yeah.
feel like my DNA has changed.
Absolutely. And to your point, trauma traps in your fascia too. So
Mhm.
yoga, yin yoga in particular, is a beautiful
I
way to release
love
trauma
yin
and
yoga.
you'll feel it
Oh,
because you
yes.
feel it release and let go instantaneously,
Mhm.
but absolutely. So with just a little bit of time left, what's something you want to impart our audience with so that they can take away something that they can just immediately put into
Mhm.
effect to help them start to release trauma. You
Mhm.
gave us a myriad of different wonderful tools. Some of them
Mhm.
I've used personally, so I agree with you.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what's one that you can say if you don't do anything else, start with
Mhm.
this?
Yeah, take care of your physical body. So even if it just starts with you lovingly putting lotion on your skin, but do something for your body. Take care of this animal of yours. Take care of your body. You deserve to be taken care of. I neglected the shit out of myself for decades.
Yeah.
And now I'm trying to make up for lost time. But really, it is not selfish to take care of yourself. And also, selfish is not an epithet. There's something wrong in our. I had a client the other day said, I'd rather be called a whore than selfish. Like, what is going on in our society that a woman would rather be called a whore than selfish? So it's not selfish, but take care of your physical body. Touch your body with love.
Yeah. Oh, that is so, so profound and so good because I'll tell you in my own healing journey, giving myself a hug, even now, if I'm struggling, I will sit there and I will nurture myself and give myself a hug. And I think that's where that healing from trauma brings you to a place where you no longer need any external circumstance. You don't need a loved one. You don't need affirmation from somebody. You have the ability to nurture yourself in such a meaningful and profound way that you no longer need to lean into anything to keep you from that. So thank you so much. This was such a gift. I appreciate your time and I look forward to connecting with you offline to get to know more about you and see how I can support you in your work. It's exceptional.
So I have a free boundary building starter kit, and I think it's in my free gifts, but I just dropped it in the chat here for people. So it's got some of my best stuff and it's all free and it's multimedia. So no matter how you take in information, there's probably something there for you.
Absolutely love that so much. And I'm certainly going to check it out too because we all need more tools to continue to
Yeah.
keep us grounded, feeling safe, and making choices that really help us feel empowered and not even optimistic, but just peaceful. What you said is just
Mhm, mhm,
being able to feel peace and grounded in whatever experience we're having in this moment. That's just so powerful. So once again, thank you
mhm.
so much, Barb.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you. And I already started following you, so we'll be able to connect on social media.